It was a busy Friday evening at one of New York's most famous restaurants. The lights were warm and soft. Jazz music played gently in the background, and the smell of roasted garlic and butter filled the air. Waiters moved quickly between tables, smiling politely, balancing trays filled with plates and glasses. It was the kind of place where people came not just to eat, but to be seen, where the rich and powerful often showed off their status. Among the staff was Amara, a young black woman in her early 20s. She had been working there for almost a year, trying to save money for her college tuition. Amara was known for her kindness and professionalism. No matter how tired she felt, she always greeted every customer with the same warm smile. Her coworkers respected her because she never lost her patience, even when customers were rude or demanding. She had a quiet strength about her, the kind that didn't need words to be noticed. That evening, just as Amara was wiping down a table near the window, the restaurant doors opened and a tall man in an expensive gray suit walked in. His entrance caught everyone's attention. He was followed by 2 bodyguards and a few well-dressed men in designer suits. The man was Mr. Karim Al-Farouk, a billionaire businessman from the Middle East. He was known for his luxury hotels, his private jets, and his habit of showing off his wealth wherever he went. People recognized him immediately. Some whispered his name. Others quickly reached for their phones to take pictures. Mr. Al-Farouk was used to this kind of attention. He enjoyed it. He walked with confidence, his gold watch glinting under the restaurant lights. His deep voice carried through the room as he greeted the manager, who rushed to shake his hand. Everyone could feel the sudden change in atmosphere, the mix of curiosity, admiration, and fear that powerful people often bring with them. Amara was asked to take care of his table, something most waiters avoided when serving difficult or high-profile guests. But Amara wasn't afraid. She simply straightened her uniform, took a deep breath, and walked toward the billionaire's table with calm confidence. "Good evening, sir," she said kindly, placing the menu in front of him. "Welcome to La Maison. My name is Amara, and I'll be serving you tonight." Mr. Al-Farouk barely looked at her. He was busy scrolling on his phone while one of his companions spoke rapidly in Arabic beside him. Amara waited patiently, her smile still gentle. When he finally looked up, he gave a half smirk, more out of habit than politeness. "Water," he said shortly, without saying please or thank you. His tone was commanding, like someone used to being obeyed. "Of course, sir," Amara replied softly. She turned to get the water, but as she walked away, she could hear quiet laughter coming from the table. They were speaking in Arabic, a language that Amara happened to know very well, though she never told anyone at work. The men at the table continued talking, unaware that she understood every word. They made comments about how American service workers acted, joked about her hair, and even laughed about her polite manner. Mr. Al-Farouk said something cruel, something meant to entertain his guests, a line that made the men roar with laughter. Amara heard it clearly. It stung, but she didn't react. She simply carried on with her work, keeping her head high. When she returned with their drinks, her movements were graceful, calm, and professional. She placed each glass carefully, her face still kind. Mr. Al-Farouk looked at her with mild amusement, as if she were invisible, just another worker serving his table. But behind Amara's calm eyes there was strength. She had faced worse things before, rude customers, long nights, and constant struggle, but she never let anyone take away her dignity. What Mr. Al-Farouk didn't know was that Amara had spent 3 years studying languages at a community college before she started working at the restaurant. Arabic was one of the languages she had mastered. It was something she was proud of, something that connected her to a world far beyond her daily routine. As the evening went on, Mr. Al-Farouk and his friends continued laughing loudly, ordering expensive dishes and talking carelessly. Every time Amara came by, they lowered their voices slightly, but not enough. She could still hear the jokes. Still, she smiled and continued to serve them with patience. Other guests in the restaurant noticed the billionaire too. Some looked at him with admiration, others with quiet judgment. But nobody dared to say anything. Power has a strange way of silencing people. Only Amara, standing quietly by their table, seemed untouched by his wealth or arrogance. There was something unspoken in her calm, a quiet confidence that didn't need money or fame. When she took their main course order, she looked directly at him, her tone polite but steady. There was no fear, no hesitation. Something about her composure made one of the men at the table glance at her with curiosity, as if sensing she was not just another waitress. Mr. Al-Farouk didn't notice. He was too busy trying to impress his friends. But soon he would notice, and he would remember this night for the rest of his life. What Amara didn't realize yet was that she was about to teach this billionaire a lesson he would never forget. A lesson about respect, humility, and how intelligence can outshine wealth in the most unexpected ways. The restaurant lights shimmered across the tables, the soft music continued to play, and Amara walked back toward the kitchen, her heart calm, her mind sharp, and her moment quietly waiting for her. The night grew busier as more guests filled the restaurant. The sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and soft music mixed in the air. But at one corner, the billionaire's table stood out, louder, brighter, and surrounded by the quiet attention of everyone nearby. Amara carried a tray with their appetizers, grilled shrimp, golden calamari, and a basket of freshly baked bread. She placed each dish carefully on the table, her smile polite, her hand steady. "Your starters, sir," she said gently. Mr. Karim Al-Farouk didn't respond immediately. He looked up at her with the same expression he had for most people he considered beneath him, cold amusement. Then switching to Arabic, he said to his companions, "Look at her. So serious, like she's serving the president." The men at the table chuckled. One of them leaned closer and replied in Arabic, "Maybe she thinks good manners can buy her a better life." Amara understood every word. Each sentence cut like a small, sharp blade. But her face remained calm, a mask of quiet professionalism. She had heard similar things before. Some customers saw her dark skin and humble job and made assumptions. But this was different. These men weren't just rude. They were mocking her in a language they thought she couldn't understand. Another man joined in, his voice dripping with arrogance. "She probably doesn't even know what we're saying. Look at her smile, she has no idea." Mr. Al-Farouk laughed loudly. "If she did," he said, "she'd run back to the kitchen in shame." The table burst into laughter again. It was a harsh sound, one that made nearby diners glance over in discomfort. But none of them dared to interfere. Amara felt her stomach tighten. She wanted to speak, to respond, but she reminded herself to stay composed. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Dignity isn't about staying silent. It's about choosing when to speak. So she said nothing. Not yet. She turned slightly and walked toward the counter, her heart beating faster. Inside, she was angry, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been disrespected for simply doing their job. But she also felt something else, control. She knew something they didn't, and that knowledge gave her power. From the other side of the restaurant, her coworker James noticed her face. "You okay, Amara?" he whispered as she passed by. She nodded, forcing a small smile. "I'm fine," she said softly, "just doing my job." James looked at her a moment longer, sensing something was off but didn't press further. Back at the table, the laughter continued. Mr. Al-Farouk and his men switched between English and Arabic, their conversation full of pride and expensive talk, about business deals, luxury cars, and private islands. Every now and then, one of them would glance at Amara and say something mocking again, still in Arabic, just to amuse the group. When Amara returned with their drinks, the billionaire smirked. "You're very polite," he said in English. "That's refreshing." His words were smooth, but his tone wasn't kind. "Thank you, sir," she replied calmly. He leaned back, still amused. Then he said in Arabic, "If only she knew we're laughing at her. Poor thing." That was the moment something inside Amara shifted. She looked at him for a second, not angrily, not bitterly, just silently. And in her heart she made a decision. If he wanted to test her dignity, she would let him. But she would do it on her own terms, in her own way. As she walked away again, her mind began to replay his words, not with pain, but with quiet purpose. She had always believed that intelligence was the best revenge. And tonight she would prove it. From their table, the men kept talking, unaware that every insult, every arrogant joke was being perfectly understood. They thought they were clever, untouchable, but arrogance has a way of blinding people, especially those who think money gives them power over others. After a few minutes, Mr. Al-Farouk called out loudly, snapping his fingers. Something Amara always found disrespectful, but she approached anyway. "Yes, sir?" she asked politely. He looked her up and down with that same cold amusement. "Bring us another bottle of your best wine. And be quick, please. My guests are thirsty." "Of course, sir," she said. Her tone remained soft, but her eyes carried something new. Quiet strength. As she turned, one of the men whispered in Arabic, "Maybe we should give her a tip for understanding how to serve properly." More laughter. Amara walked to the bar counter, her back straight. Inside, her emotions burned like fire, but she kept her composure. She knew patience was her greatest weapon. When she returned with the wine, she moved with grace, pouring each glass perfectly, not spilling a single drop. Her movements were calm, confident, almost regal. The men kept talking, but she no longer heard the insults. Her mind was focused on what would come next, because she knew her moment was near. As she finished pouring the last glass, Mr. Al-Farouk said one more thing in Arabic, louder this time. A final cruel joke meant to make his friends laugh, and in that instant Amara looked directly at him. She didn't speak. Not yet. But her eyes told a story of their own. It was the kind of look that made even the arrogant hesitate for a second. For the first time that night, Mr. Al-Farouk noticed something different in her gaze. Calm confidence, not fear. He didn't realize it yet. But the same language he used to mock her would soon become the very thing that humbled him. The restaurant had grown even busier now. The air buzzed with the soft hum of conversations, the gentle clinking of glasses, and the quiet notes of a piano drifting from the corner stage. But at one table, the mood was different. The laughter from the billionaires group had changed. It was louder, sharper, almost mocking in rhythm. People nearby tried to pretend they didn't hear, but everyone felt the uneasy energy surrounding that corner. Amara moved between tables, refilling glasses and taking new orders, her face calm but her mind alert. She could still hear the occasional Arabic phrase coming from the billionaire's table. Each time they laughed, it wasn't the laughter of joy. It was the laughter of arrogance. But Amara had learned one important lesson in life. People who mock others often reveal more about themselves than the person they insult. When she passed by their table again, she noticed how their eyes followed her, not with respect, but with a strange curiosity, like someone watching a scene they thought they controlled. But Amara wasn't their scene. She was about to become their story. Mr. Karim Al-Farouk leaned back in his chair, sipping his wine, a self-satisfied grin on his face. "You know," he said in English, "service here is quite good." For once, his tone dripped with sarcasm. His friends laughed again, the sound echoing awkwardly through the quiet restaurant. Amara stood nearby pretending to check the wine bottle label, but inside her heart beat faster. Not from fear, but from the awareness that this moment was slowly building into something bigger than any of them realized. She turned slightly and saw the restaurant manager watching nervously from the counter. He knew who Mr. Al-Farouk was, an important client, someone who could tip generously or complain ruinously. He gave Amara a quick look, silently asking her to stay calm. She gave him a soft nod, signaling she had it under control. When she walked away, she could hear Mr. Al-Farouk switch back to Arabic. "She's obedient," he said. "That's rare these days. They usually talk back," his friend chuckled. "Maybe she's too simple to understand." Those words, "too simple to understand," stayed in the air like smoke. Amara walked toward the kitchen doors, her hands tightening slightly on her tray. She could feel anger rising inside her, but she also felt something stronger, patience. A deep, quiet kind of patience that comes from knowing you hold a truth the other person can't see. In the kitchen, she took a moment to breathe. The noise of dishes and chatter surrounded her, but her mind was focused. She poured water into glasses, her thoughts racing but steady. "If they think they can laugh at me because they assume I don't understand," she thought, "then I'll let them finish laughing first." When she stepped back into the dining area, her expression was serene again, her smile calm, her steps graceful. The piano music seemed softer now, as if the entire room was holding its breath for what would come next. At the billionaire's table, the laughter had started to fade. They were slowing down, full from their meal and their jokes. Mr. Al-Farouk leaned on the table, glancing around with the tired confidence of a man who thought he owned every room he entered. Then his eyes met Amara's for a brief second, and something flickered. Her gaze was steady, unshaken. There was no anger, no embarrassment, just calm strength. He looked away quickly, almost uncomfortable. One of his friends noticed. "What's wrong?" he asked in Arabic, teasing. "Did the waitress finally scare you?" Mr. Al-Farouk laughed, but it sounded forced. "No," he said. "She's just very professional." But deep down, he didn't like that she hadn't reacted. He had expected her to look hurt, to blush, maybe even to avoid them. Instead, she seemed unbothered, and that bothered him. The tension in the air thickened. The other guests in the restaurant could feel it too, even if they didn't know why. Something was changing at that table, an invisible shift of power. When Amara came to clear their plates, she did so with the same quiet confidence as always. "Did you enjoy your meal, sir?" she asked politely. "Yes," he said, leaning back. "You've done well." But again, in Arabic, he added under his breath, "I wonder if she'd serve this well if she knew what we really think of her." Amara froze for just a heartbeat, long enough for her to decide. It was time. She smiled, nodded, and turned toward the kitchen one last time. As she walked away, she could feel dozens of eyes subtly watching her. They didn't know why, but something about the air had changed. The music, the lights, even the laughter seemed softer, like the calm right before thunder. In her heart, Amara whispered to herself, "Respect isn't given. It's earned. But tonight I will remind them that it's also deserved." At that same moment, one of the waiters whispered to another, "What's happening over there?" "I don't know," the other replied quietly, "but I think something's about to happen." And they were right. Amara took a deep breath near the kitchen doorway. She wasn't angry anymore, she was ready. Ready to speak, ready to surprise, ready to reclaim her dignity, not with shouting or tears, but with intelligence, grace, and a language they thought belonged only to them. Back at the table, Mr. Al-Farouk poured himself another glass of wine, still laughing with his friends. He had no idea that within minutes the same woman he had mocked would leave him speechless in front of everyone, and remind him of a lesson his money could never buy. The stage was set. The laughter would soon stop, and the entire restaurant, including the billionaire himself, would remember the name Amara long after that night was over. The restaurant had reached that late evening stillness where everything felt slower, the laughter quieter, the music softer, and the glow from the chandeliers warmer. Yet at one table tension hummed beneath the calm. The billionaire and his guests were finishing their wine, their voices growing louder as pride and alcohol mixed together. Amara stood by the counter, watching quietly. She had served countless people before, rude customers, kind ones, tired families, impatient businessmen. But this table was different. It wasn't just about service anymore. It had become something personal, not just for her, but for every person who had ever been looked down upon because of their job, their accent, or the color of their skin. She took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and lifted the dessert tray from the counter. The faint scent of chocolate and coffee filled the air as she walked toward the table, each step steady, graceful, and deliberate. Her co-workers noticed her expression, calm, focused, but her eyes carried a quiet fire. When she reached the table, Mr. Karim Al-Farouk leaned back with that same smug smile. "Ah, dessert," he said. Finally. Amara placed the plates gently before each man, saying nothing. Her silence seemed to amuse them even more. They exchanged glances, their smirks returning. "Thank you, miss," one of the men said, his tone mockingly polite. Then, switching to Arabic, he whispered, "She looks tired. Maybe she's working 2 jobs, or maybe she just dreams too high." The others chuckled softly. And then Mr. Al-Farouk added his final insult, the one that would break the moment wide open. "Some people," he said in Arabic, "were born to serve. It's their place in life. No amount of English or fake smiles can change that." Laughter again. But this time it didn't echo for long. Amara stood still, holding the tray in her hands. For a few seconds she said nothing. Then slowly she turned her gaze to him. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were bright, not with anger, but with understanding, and then she spoke in perfect, fluent Arabic, her voice soft yet clear. She said, "And some people were born to learn humility, sir. It's a lesson money can't teach." The words floated across the table like a quiet wave. The laughter stopped instantly. Mr. Al-Farouk blinked, his smile fading. He stared at her as if he hadn't heard correctly. What did you say? He asked, switching to English. Amara didn't change her tone. Still in Arabic, she continued. You said some people were born to serve. Maybe that's true. But I serve with respect, and something you seem to have forgotten how to give. The air around them thickened. Every sound in the restaurant seemed to fade. The music, the chatter, even the clinking of glasses. People nearby turned their heads, sensing something powerful happening. Amara placed the tray on the side table and stood tall. Her Arabic flowed effortlessly, elegant, articulate, and full of quiet strength. You shouldn't assume that because someone wears a uniform, they lack education or worth. Every person here deserves respect, from the one who cooks your meal to the one who cleans your plate. If you truly wish to be a great man, start by treating others as equals, not entertainment. Each word struck like a bell, calm, precise, undeniable. Mr. Al-Farouk sat frozen. His face, once proud and amused, had turned pale. His guests looked between him and Amara, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. One of them whispered softly, "She speaks Arabic, fluently." Amara gave a small nod. "Yes," she said, still in Arabic. "I studied your language for 3 years. It's a beautiful language, one I respect deeply. But hearing it used to insult others is a shame." The room had gone completely silent now. Even the pianist had stopped playing, pretending to adjust his sheet music while listening. Every pair of eyes nearby was on Amara. Then, in English, she said gently, "Is there anything else I can get for you, sir?" Her tone was polite, professional, but her gaze held power. The same power he had tried to take from her now belonged to her completely. For a long moment, Mr. Al-Farouk said nothing. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. His confidence had vanished, replaced by something unfamiliar. Humility. He finally managed to speak, but his voice was quieter. "No," he said softly. "That will be all." Amara nodded once, collected the tray, and walked away with the same calm grace she had started the evening with. But now the entire room watched her in awe. As she disappeared behind the kitchen doors, whispers began to spread through the restaurant. Some people smiled to themselves, others exchanged glances of admiration. What they had just witnessed wasn't a scene of anger, it was a moment of truth. Back at the table, one of Mr. Al-Farouk's friends leaned closer and whispered, "You shouldn't have said those things." Mr. Al-Farouk didn't respond. He stared down at his untouched dessert, lost in thought. For the first time in years, he felt small, not because of shame, but because of realization. The woman he had mocked had more grace, more intelligence, and more control than he had ever shown. Across the room, the restaurant manager quietly approached Amara. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She smiled. "Yes," she said simply. "I just said what needed to be said." He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with quiet respect. "That was incredible." Amara shrugged gently. "Sometimes the best way to answer disrespect," she said, "is with understanding, in the same language they use to insult you." That night, the restaurant would return to its normal rhythm, the clinking, the laughter, the music. But nothing would feel quite the same, because everyone who witnessed that moment had seen something unforgettable. A billionaire humbled not by anger, but by truth. And though Amara went back to her work as if nothing had happened, her quiet victory would echo far beyond that dining room. For a moment, the restaurant existed in absolute silence. No clinking of silverware, no soft laughter. Even the pianist, who had been playing an elegant tune just a few minutes earlier, stopped mid-song and let his fingers rest on the keys. It was as if time itself had frozen. Every person in the room had witnessed what had just happened. A billionaire, powerful and proud, brought to quiet humility by a waitress who refused to be small. Amara stood still for a second longer after. Her final words, her hands resting gently against the tray. Her heart was beating fast, but her face remained calm. She didn't need applause. She didn't need attention. She had said what needed to be said, and that was enough. Then, slowly, she turned and walked away. Each step echoed softly on the marble floor, and somehow that sound, the steady rhythm of her shoes, felt louder than the billionaire's laughter had been all evening. At his table, Mr. Karim Al-Farouk sat frozen. His once confident smirk had vanished completely. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes wide, as if trying to process what had just happened. His friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding each other's eyes. The pride that had filled their conversation minutes ago had dissolved into a thick, heavy silence. One of them tried to speak. She spoke perfect Arabic. Another cleared his throat and nodded awkwardly. Better than us, Mr. Al-Farouk said nothing. He stared at his untouched dessert, his reflection faintly visible in the polished silver spoon beside it. For the first time in years, he felt small, not because of embarrassment, but because something inside him had cracked. It wasn't just that he had been called out. It was how she had done it, calmly, without anger, without a single insult. She had spoken with respect, even while correcting his disrespect. That kind of grace was something he had rarely seen, and never expected from someone he had judged so quickly. Across the room, customers began to whisper quietly. A young couple near the window exchanged looks of admiration. An older woman smiled to herself, murmuring, "Good for her." Even the restaurant manager, who had been nervously watching from the corner, exhaled in relief. A soft, proud sigh. But Amara didn't notice any of it. She was in the kitchen now, standing by the sink, taking a quiet breath. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the rush of what had just happened. Her co-worker James came up beside her. "Amara," he said, half whispering. "That was unbelievable. You actually spoke to him like that?" She smiled faintly. "I didn't plan to," she said softly. "It just felt right." James grinned. "Well, you said it perfectly. I've never seen that man shut up before." Amara laughed quietly, a small relieved sound. "Sometimes silence is the best reply," she said. Back at the billionaire's table, the silence continued. Mr. Al-Farouk took a long sip of water, still unable to meet anyone's eyes. For the first time in his life, words had failed him. Money couldn't fix this moment. Status couldn't erase it. One of his associates leaned in and whispered carefully, "Maybe you should apologize." Mr. Al-Farouk's jaw tightened. His pride resisted the idea, but somewhere deeper inside him a quieter voice agreed. He had been wrong, painfully, publicly wrong. He pushed his chair back and stood up. The sound of the chair legs scraping against the floor made several people glance up. Slowly, he walked toward the counter where Amara stood, still organizing the bills and preparing coffee cups for other tables. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath again. Amara looked up as he approached. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, in a voice softer than anyone had ever heard from him, he said, "Miss Amara, is it?" "Yes, sir," she replied gently, her tone calm and polite. He hesitated, his hands clasped together in front of him. "I owe you an apology." Amara tilted her head slightly, her eyes kind but steady. "For what, sir?" "For my behavior," he said. His accent was heavier now, not from arrogance, but from emotion. "I spoke without respect, I made assumptions, and I forgot that manners are worth more than money." Her lips curved into a small smile. "It takes strength to admit that," she said softly. "Thank you." He nodded slowly. "You speak Arabic beautifully," he added, almost in disbelief. "My mother was a teacher," Amara replied. "She taught me that learning someone's language is the highest form of respect." Something in her words struck him deeply. He nodded again, his eyes lowering briefly, not out of shame, but reflection. "I see now," he said quietly. "That respect goes both ways." Amara gave a small nod. "Yes, it does." For a few seconds, they simply looked at each other. Two people from completely different worlds connected by a moment of truth. Then Mr. Al-Farouk turned and walked back to his table. The restaurant slowly began to breathe again, soft chatter returning like waves after a storm. When he sat down, his friends said nothing. There was no more laughter, no more arrogance, only quiet understanding. The power that had filled the table before now rested with the one woman who had never raised her voice. Later that night, as Mr. Al-Farouk left the restaurant, he turned once more to look at Amara, who was wiping down a table near the door. He gave her a small nod, a gesture of genuine respect, and then walked out into the cool night. For Amara, it was just another shift ending. She didn't see herself as a hero, but for everyone who had witnessed it, she was a reminder that real strength isn't in loudness or wealth, but in dignity, intelligence, and grace. And in that silence where pride fell and respect rose, the entire restaurant learned something powerful that night. Sometimes the most powerful words are the ones spoken quietly, by the people no one expects. The night outside was quiet and cool, the city lights reflecting off the wet streets after a light drizzle. Cars moved lazily, and a soft wind rustled through the trees lining the avenue. But inside Mr. Karim Al-Farouk's car, silence ruled. The billionaire sat in the back seat, his gaze lost in the blur of passing lights. His bodyguards said nothing. His friends, who usually filled every moment with chatter, sat awkwardly, unsure of what to say. Karim leaned his head against the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass. His mind wasn't on his business deals or his wealth for once. It was on the waitress, Amara. Her words echoed in his head like a quiet melody he couldn't shake off. Respect goes both ways. Learning someone's language is the highest form of respect. He had spent his life speaking to people, employees, politicians, investors, but very few had ever spoken to him like that. Calmly, honestly, without fear. For the first time in a long while, Karim felt something unfamiliar, self-reflection. When he reached his penthouse, the city stretched beneath him like a map of lights. Normally he loved that view. It made him feel powerful above the world. But tonight it only made him feel small. He poured himself a glass of water and sat by the window. The sound of distant sirens mixed with the hum of the city below. He thought about how he had laughed at Amara, how he had assumed she wouldn't understand, and how easily he had used his language, something sacred, as a tool to belittle someone else. He thought of her calm voice, her steady gaze, and the way she hadn't shouted or insulted him in return. That silence had burned deeper than any loud argument could have. For years, Karim had believed that success meant never being wrong. That power meant never apologizing. But that one quiet moment in the restaurant had shattered those illusions. He realized that he had built his empire on control, not connection. He had wealth, but he had lost the simple ability to respect others without status in return. He couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Amara's face. Not angry, not proud, but peaceful. He envied that peace. The next morning, as sunlight spilled into the glass apartment, he made a decision. He called his assistant and said, "Find out who that waitress was. The one from La Maison last night." "Her name is Amara." His assistant hesitated. "Of course, sir. May I ask why?" Karim paused. "Because I need to speak to her again," he said quietly. And this time, not as a customer. A few days later, Amara arrived at work for another evening shift. The restaurant was busy as usual, the smell of fresh bread and herbs filling the air. She had almost forgotten about that night, or at least she tried to. It had become one of those memories you carry quietly, proud of it but not boastful. As she adjusted her apron and prepared her station, the manager walked up to her, his expression slightly puzzled. "Amara," he said, "someone's asking for you at table 7. "Who?" she asked, frowning slightly. "You'll see," he said with a knowing smile. When she walked out into the dining area, her steps slowed. Sitting at table 7, dressed simply this time in a plain white shirt, was Mr. Karim Al-Farouk. No bodyguards, no entourage, no arrogance, just him. He stood up when he saw her, something he had never done before. "Miss Amara," he greeted, his voice softer than she remembered. She blinked, surprised but composed. "Good evening, sir," she replied. "Would you like to be seated?" He shook his head gently. "Actually, I came to speak to you, and if you have a moment." Amara hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." Karim looked down briefly, searching for the right words. "I've been thinking about that night," he said slowly. "About what I said. About how I behaved." He sighed. "I was wrong. Completely." Amara listened quietly, not interrupting. "I've spent years surrounded by people who agree with me, who laugh at my jokes, even when they're cruel. I forgot what it means to speak with kindness," he continued. "You reminded me that not by shouting, not by arguing, but by being better, smarter, kinder." Amara smiled faintly. "Sometimes the best lessons come from uncomfortable moments," she said softly. He nodded. "You're right. And I wanted to thank you. Properly." He placed a small envelope on the table. "This isn't a tip," he said quickly. "It's something I wanted to do. Inside is a scholarship application form for any university you wish to attend. I've already spoken to the foundation I sponsor. If you accept, they'll cover your tuition." Amara's eyes widened. "Sir, I can't." "Ah, yes, you can," he interrupted gently. "It's not charity. It's respect. For what you taught me." For a moment, Amara didn't know what to say. Her heart felt full. Not because of the money, but because she saw sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't trying to erase his mistake. He was trying to grow from it. "Thank you," she said finally. "That means a lot." He smiled, and a real humble smile. "No," he said quietly. "Thank you." Then he stood, nodded respectfully, and left the restaurant, leaving the envelope on the table. As Amara picked it up, she didn't feel like she had won something. She felt like something had been healed. A small act of kindness had bridged the space between two worlds that rarely meet, one of wealth, one of work, and turned arrogance into understanding. And as she tucked the envelope away, she whispered to herself, "Sometimes respect finds its way back." Weeks passed after that unforgettable night, but its echo lingered, not just in the restaurant, but in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. People talked. The story spread quietly at first, like a whisper carried from one table to another. Then, as stories do, it grew wings. A food critic who had been dining at La Maison that night wrote a short post online about the waitress who spoke in silence and changed a man with words. Within days, it went viral. Across social media, people began sharing the tale, a billionaire mocking a waitress in Arabic, only for her to respond fluently, gracefully, and without anger. The world didn't know Amara's full name, but they knew her spirit. They called her the woman who taught respect. At first, Amara didn't realize her story had spread. She continued her work like always, serving tables, helping coworkers, smiling at customers. She never bragged about what happened. In fact, when others asked her if the story was true, she simply said, "It doesn't matter who it happened to. It matters that it reminds people to be kind." But the story reached far beyond her small circle. It crossed countries and languages, touching people who had never met her but felt as if they knew her. Teachers shared it with students. Motivational speakers told it on stages. Even businessmen used it as an example in seminars about humility and emotional intelligence. And somewhere across the ocean, in a quiet office overlooking the Arabian Gulf, Karim Al-Farouk read one of those articles. He sat alone at his desk, staring at the headline, "When Power Meets Grace, the Waitress Who Humbled a Billionaire." He could have been angry. He could have called his lawyers. But instead he smiled softly. The world didn't mock him. It reminded him of who he had become that night. A man who had learned something money could never buy. He printed the article and placed it in a leather notebook where he kept personal reminders, not of his successes but of his lessons. On the top of that page he wrote in Arabic, "Respect is the true language of power." From that day forward, Karim began changing small things in his life. He greeted his staff by name. He learned the stories of the people who worked for him. He began supporting scholarships for service workers' children, in Amara's name, though she didn't know it yet. Back in New York, Amara's life began to shift quietly too. One afternoon, she received an official letter from the Global Language Foundation, confirming that her scholarship had been approved, fully funded, thanks to an anonymous sponsor. She smiled when she read it. Deep down, she knew who it was, but she didn't need confirmation. When she started her university classes that fall, she often thought about that night, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. It had tested her patience, her dignity, and her strength, but it had also revealed something powerful, that kindness, when rooted in confidence, can transform even the hardest hearts. She sometimes visited the restaurant to see her old coworkers. They always greeted her with pride. James, her closest friend there, often teased, "Hey, superstar, any more billionaires to humble today?" She'd laugh and say, "No, I think one was enough." Yet every time she spoke about that night, she never told it as a story of revenge. She always told it as a story of understanding. "It's easy to respond to hate with hate," she would say, "but it takes real strength to respond with calm, to make someone listen. Not by shouting, but by speaking their language, literally and emotionally." Her story became a quiet legend, one told not for fame, but for faith in humanity. Months later, as fate would have it, Amara received a letter with no return name, only a golden seal. Inside was a simple note, handwritten in elegant Arabic. "The world heard your voice. Thank you for teaching me, we and many others, that true power is not in wealth, but in respect." Kaif Amara smiled as she read it, tracing the Arabic letters with her finger. Then she folded the letter carefully and placed it inside her journal. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of a moment when pride met grace and grace won quietly. Years later, people would still tell the story. Some would call it instant karma, others would call it a beautiful lesson in humanity. But to Amara, it was something simpler, a reminder that no one is truly above or below anyone else. We all speak the same language when it comes to respect. And so, in a world full of loud voices and quick judgments, her story remained a whisper that carried far and wide. A whisper that said, "Be kind, because you never know who understands you." The lesson was clear, timeless, and powerful. Money may open doors, but respect, quiet, honest respect, opens hearts.